So I need this in here and a chair in case there is an accident. All right, so we discussed.
Could one of us sit in the front row to catch you?
So
you should get a grad student to just like wait for you there.
Yeah, yeah, usually it comes, but not that time. Okay, so last time we discussed really how polymer models were important to understand the new type of data that are now accessible in to understand how the nucleus is organized. So let's continue this. Polymer physics, this is the last class of nucleus organization and nucleus organization. So this is, we discussed last time some questions. So I'm not going to repeat all of them, but at least I would like to discuss some other motivations. And one motivation is, we said last time, when you have the nucleus, you have the DNA that is folded, and you are really interested in the following question, is what do we know about the proximity of two specific genes? Can we, if we have the information on many cells about the frequency at which 2 points comes together, reconstruct the distribution, the organization? Well, this raises a question in statistical physics. How do we want, is it possible to reconstruct a single cell realization from averaging over many realizations? It seems not realistic. However, by doing this type of analysis, people have discovered substructures. They looked at this encounter probability matrix. So encounter probability matrix, M. So what is Mij? This is the frequency at which two given sites, I and j, comes together. So suppose now you come up with a 100,000 by 100,000 matrix. What kind of structure you can extract from the matrix? Well, what they have observed is that this matrix had some diagonal blocks. You could see clear diagonal blocks. And now one of the important questions that is still under investigation, what creates those blocks? So the blocks seems to be real because they came out from the statistics. Now, if you have a block here, which means that there is obviously a subregion that is closely connected. How do you reconstruct this connection here? How do you do this? So this is what we're working on. And for this, I would like to continue this polymer modeling that we are doing. Another way to represent this is, for example, if you are along here your genome, you can look, you fix one of the guy. This is the encounter probability. So the encounter probability, if you are very close, this is your colleague, so it's like very high. And as you decrease, the encounter probability will decay. Until you go, for example, to a guy where, for some reason, it is located very closely, and you will see a peak in the encounter probability because they are together as if it was. So you see something like this, and sometimes have a peak. Now suppose you have this. This is the genomic distance. This is the distance from the guy you have selected. Let's call it the origin, 0, and this is the distance according to the origin here. Now, if you have the peaks, how do you then include the peaks in a polymer model that would capture the statistical property such that if you run the polymer simulations for this, you will, in the statistics of this, you will recover the empirical matrix that you obtained from data. Now you would say, why doing this? Why bothering doing this? Just look at this. Now we have some information here. Why doing and going into polymer models? Well, this is a steady state This is steady state representation. But now, for example, if you are interested in transient properties, you cannot extract transient property from steady state. You have to have a model to generate a simulation, and for example, to ask, what's the probability that, for example, suppose we have three sites, A, B, and C, and ask, what is the probability, for example, that A meets C before B, for example, and all kind of question of this type, and what is then the time of A to meet C before B. So this is the probability, and this is the conditional mean first passage time. So in general, this is very hard to calculate because, I mean, asymptotically, so you want to run a Brownian simulation where the polymer model has the same statistics as the empirical data and gets this information. And why it is important? Because it gives you some regulation under the control of the statistics. Okay, so this is some motivations for continuing this notion of loop, because the loop is the indication of these peaks. And then once you have a region which is highly connected, I'm not going to discuss that today. Suppose you have a polymer. You have point 1 to n. If you want to create a region that is more connected, this region here, you have zeros here, you have zeros, and here it's more dense. They have higher numbers for this counter probability coefficient. How do you create, for example, a structure like this with higher number of encounter probability? Well, in some sense, you should be able to have all of these points more close together. So the idea is that there is, in the literature, some molecules that can do that are called coesins, that can create, when these two parts come together by chance, for example, when this becomes here, they start to glue them, and it's attached. And if you do this, so what we looked at, if you do this at random in a certain region, wherever they are positioned, this region is going to appear. That is, you're going to increase from 0 or very small encounter probability to higher encounter probability, and this depends mostly of the number, not where they're connected. And this creates a region, this is called this topological associating domains. That is a domain more connected, more together like a blob compared to the rest of the chromatin. Okay, so let's now, this is the motivation for discussing the two problems that I wanted to finish last time. One is to do asymptotics for the asymptotics for the looping time. So this is part one. Asymptotic expansion of the mean looping time. Mean looping time. We are going to do in R3 in the entire space. It's full space. And in a confined domain. And this asymptotic result is going to be important for the interpretation here of the asymptotic value of this curve, of the encounter probability. And we have done this, and I'll show you why and how from the asymptotic behavior here, you can recover the subdomains where the polymer is located. What I'm saying is this. This is the entire nucleus. Suppose by the frequency of looping, you can look, depending on region A, you can look at the time it takes, or the frequency it takes for the point A and B. So this is of radius R. And you look at how long it takes for the point A and B to meet. It turns out that this time depends on the radius R. And then I will show you, I'll explain how to do a reverse engineering problem by having exactly the asymptotic formula. That is, if you know this looping time, which you can extract from data, it can lead us to an estimation of the radius of we should see it as an imaginary radius, a place where the polymer is confined or the chromatin is confined. And this can be, we could extract that from the behavior of this curve, or the encounter probability. And this came from the asymptotic formula. That's why I want to spend time on this asymptotic formula. All right, so let's start with what we discussed last week, or 2 weeks ago. We said that, so now how to derive the asymptotic formula. So now let's go to derivation. So we said that let's have a polymer, which is a Rouse polymer. So we are in the case of a Rouse polymer. And each beads are connected by spring. Bead K, K plus 1, up to N. And they are the motion, the Smolokhovsky limit of the motion is just the gradient of the potential phi with respect to xk plus 2dwk, which d is the diffusion coefficient. This is the noise. And the potential, which is phi of x1, xn, it is equal to 1/2 of kappa. Kappa is the spring constant. Spring constant. The sum of xk minus xk plus 1 squared for k equals 0 to n minus 1. So this is the potential. You take the gradient. This is the equation that we have for k equals 1 or 0, 1 to n. So we have n equation. So this is really, if we want to understand the space where we are working, let's call x tilde, which is really the ensemble of the position of all the n beads. And we are interested in estimating the probability distribution function of the position of all these beads. This is x1, xk, xn, plus the spring constant here. And so we're interested in calculating, or at least using, the probability distribution function, p, for this x tilde, and to be able to characterize what is the joint distribution at time t. And so I think last time I did introduce the coordinates for the diagonalization of, I said if we now change coordinates, writing up is the sum of alpha pn Rn, where alpha Pn equals 1 over square root of n for p equals 0 and 2 divided by n cosine of n minus 1/2 p pi divided by n. Otherwise, then the equation for up was up dot, so just take the derivative with respect to time. Here you have a matrix which is an orthogonal matrix. You take the derivative of each Rn, which is given, let's call it Xn. So the xk are satisfying this stochastic differential equation, and you end up with the following equation: d kappa p. This is a family of Orstein-Uhlenbeck processes. Square root of dp of d, dwp tilde dt. So this is a new Brownian noise of variance 1. And this is the Orstein-Uhlenbeck process where d is the diffusion coefficient of each of the beads, and kappa p equals 4 kappa, the spring constant, sine of p pi divided by 2n to the power square. All right, and we took two classes ago, we used this space, which is really the Fourier space, to construct a polymer with a prescribed anomalous exponent. So now let's discuss the notion, the problem of looping, and I want today to show the method, how you calculate. This is the goal of the class. So the goal here would be to calculate, to estimate. So this is part B now. Part 2. Now we are interested in the mean looping time. So what is the mean looping time? We defined the looping time, tau, or tau epsilon. This is the first time that, let's say, x1 of t minus xn of t is less or equal to epsilon, condition that, of course, at time 0, their distance is bigger, x1 minus xn, or you can condition by just having a position, x1 equals, okay, whatever. This xn minus xn of 0 is strictly bigger than epsilon. And later on, we are going to average over this distribution, so that it's really not important. And so this is a stochastic number. So we have realization. We have a polymer, like here, that creates loops, and we want to see the first time that the 2 points come together. This is really what we're interested in.
Probably creating out of static for the recording.
Ah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I could have used the other wire. But I have to bend. Okay, so this is a stochastic process, and now we are interested in the mean, your average over all the realization. So how do you estimate this? And in particular, how this depends on epsilon, on the size of the polymer, and on the different parameters, which is the diffusion coefficient. Here there's a square root to d. How it depends on d, on kappa. We did it in dimension 2 and 3. I will just stick here on dimension 3. Okay, so that's the goal. How to calculate this, compute this asymptotically. Compute this time, compute asymptotically this time. Asymptotically, what does it mean? It means for epsilon small. And we were interested also in what happened for n large. And we will see that this is, the two limits are not exchangeable. It's not uniform expansion. Because basically n large means that it's as if you take your space and you increase the dimension of the space. That's why it's hard to have this uniform control. All right, so now let's define, so this condition, x1 minus xn, because this is an orthogonal matrix, you can write here, instead of up, you can write xn as a function of u of p. And this condition becomes actually a condition about the sum. And now I'm going to, this is not very deep mathematically, this is just changing this into this and writing this using cosine and sine. So I will do that now. So the condition of looping so x1 minus xn less than epsilon. So let's take the Euclidean norm. It's equivalent to 2 square root of 2n. So this is just a calculation. Sum of p only at the odd term, up cosine p pi divided by 2n less than epsilon. All right, and so we can define, actually, an ensemble, S0, which is the ensemble of the new variable u1, un minus 1. So I have to tell you that here, I didn't explain it completely. This is true for p going from 1 to n minus 1. There is either u0 or un minus 1. This u0 is just the center of mass. So I think u0, if we wrote it, yeah, it's not written, but if I remember correctly, u0 is just the motion of the center of mass. So this is like the diffusion coefficient divided by n. This is like something to W0. That is, you have a polymer. What you're interested in looping, the fact that it translates is an important for the problem of looping. And you can see it really in this decomposition. For P from 1 to n, this is the stochastic ensemble of stochastic equation. And this one is decoupled. This is just the motion of the center of mass. So we can ignore the center of mass for the problem of looping, because the translation is unimportant. And what we are interested in is for the rest of the variables in the space. So what is the space here? Each point, if you are, let's say, in dimension 3, we are in R, let's say, to power 3 multiplied by n minus 1. When we'll be in a domain, this is going to be different, such that this condition, so now let's write S0, now let's write this condition, the sum of up cosine p pi divided by 2n equals 0. So this is basically in the space. This is like a hyperplane. We have a hyperplane, and this is for p odds. This is a condition of a hyperplane. And what is this condition? It's the S epsilon. We are interested in the ensemble of points in the space, let's call it omega, such that the distance to S0 is less than epsilon. It's not exactly epsilon, but let me write it epsilon because there is some factor here. But this is the definition of the space of the set where you have a loop. When you reach this set, you have a creation of a loop. So imagine that this is the entire space. You have this condition, and you look. So this is this condition. This is an algebraic condition. I'll do this representation. And you look at all the ensemble of points that are in this domain, which should be a small domain. It's a small domain. I have really to push this up, but all right. So this is a small fraction of the entire space. A small fraction of the entire space, and this is reminiscent of this idea of narrow escape, of how long it takes to find a small region. Now let's describe this question. Now we describe algebraically the condition. This is the set where, so basically in this abstract space, if we call capital U, which is U1, UN minus 1, so this is a point in the high dimensional space, it evolves according to the stochastic equations that are here. And we are interested in the first time, at this point, will hit, the first time, you'll hit this a point in this ensemble S epsilon. Okay, so this is really a question in stochastic processes of heating time, except that the space is not 2D, it's not 3D, it's these abstract settings. So now the classical approach to this is to look at the probability distribution function, the PDF, which is a solution of the Fokker-Planck equation. Which is simply dp dt, like in any dimension. This is d. So there is, let's suppose I put diffusion coefficient here equals 1. You can always rescale. This is Laplacian p plus divergence of gradient phi multiplied by p, where phi is the potential, and the potential in this coordinate un minus 1 is just sum 1/2 of kappa of up squared for p equals 1 to n minus 1. This is kappa divided by 2. So we can assume now that there is a certain initial condition. So p0 and x equals p0, which is a given function. This is the initial condition of all your initial polymer, how it is configured. So this is given. Now, because the particle dies when it hits this point here, we need to impose an absorbing boundary condition on ds epsilon. This is S epsilon, so you take the boundary. So this is the boundary, ds epsilon. All right, so now let's go to formal expansion of this. This is true in all dimensions. So the formal solution. The formal solution is what? Is pt of x. Let's call it u. This is the sum, and we expand this. It's a self-adjoint operator. So this is the sum of a coefficient ai. This is the eigenfunction, exponential minus lambda it, and this is the eigenvalues, exponential minus phi of x of u. Right? So this is a formal expansion where lambda and wi are the eigenvalue eigenfunction associated to this equation star for this problem. Right? And this is u. And this is sum over I. All right. So right now there is nothing very exciting. This is just to go slowly from here to the expression of what is the mean first passage time for this domain as a function of the eigenvalues of this problem. And we'll see why it is important is to see how much of this eigenvalue we really need. Indeed, let me remind you this. When you have a Brownian particle that has to find a small hole, this problem is characterized by how many eigenvalues of the operator, of the Laplace operator for a Brownian motion? Well, we know that this is a long time. So this process, which visits more or less everything before exiting, is a Poisson process characterized by the first eigenvalue of the Laplacian. So we need only one eigenvalue to characterize the escape through a small hole. So here it's obviously a little bit more complicated. Do we need one or more eigenvalues? Right? So Brownian, this is for Brownian motion for narrow escape. For narrow escape, which is characterized by a single eigenvalue, like the first eigenvalue, lambda, which is exactly 1 over the mean first passage time. And that's it. The rest do really not contribute because there is a gap between the first one and the rest due to a spectral gap. Okay, but this is, first, it was for Brownian motion, and second, it was to escape through a small hole. Now, this is not exactly Brownian motion, but it should be close. And it's not a small hole, it is a narrow domain in a very high dimension. So it's not just a small hole, it has a structure. It's a narrow domain, which is given by this algebraic, it's a tubular neighborhood of this algebraic equation, which is linear, which is not very hard. So then let's write what is the mean first passage time as a function of all eigenvalues, and then let's make then approximations. So to understand this, we need to understand what is the connection between eigenvalues, between this probability distribution function and the loop. So let's make the connection now. So relation between the lambdas and looping. Well, the probability that a loop is not formed, the probability that tau epsilon is bigger than t, it is a loop is not formed. What does it mean? When a loop is formed, if this is the initial position, a loop is formed when you reach here, this domain. So a loop is not formed when the particle is still in the domain. So this is exactly the integration of the probability distribution function, this pt u, over the domain. Over which domain? The entire domain, let's call it omega, minus s epsilon. This is the probability that a loop is not formed at time t. All right, now this is great because this is the connection between the looping and the eigenvalues, because now we can plug in here this, we can integrate over omega, and we're left with this sum of exponentials. So P of t, I'm not going to take care about all of the detail of the constant, is the sum of ci exponential minus lambda I t, sum over I. Okay, and now if we want to be more specific, for example, I will use this in the future, that the initial condition P0 can be, for example, can be distributed as a function of the potential if I divided by, and then you normalize the domain with respect to this. That is, we normalize with respect to the distribution here. So this is a steady state distribution. Steady state distribution. Okay. So now what is the mean first passage time? The mean first passage time, we just can use the classical formula, and this is the mean first passage time tau, by definition, is the first moment. The first moment is the integral from 0 to infinity of t d dt of probability of tau less than t dt. So now I'm not going to do this. You integrate this by parts. You integrate this, you differentiate this, and you get this can be expressed as a function of this probability. That is what, because probability of tau less than t, it's 1 minus this. So this you can do, and then you get integration from 0 to infinity, integration over omega minus s epsilon, multiplied by pt of u du. When I say du, I mean d volume associated. This is a Euclidean volume. I mean, it's not a, well, okay, I'll specify later what it is. And when you calculate all of this, you take your formula downstairs, and what you're left with is the sum of the coefficient Ci that depends for time equals 0 on the initial condition. So this guys depends on this P0, but I'm not going to divided by lambda I epsilon, yeah, lambda I, let's call it lambda I, and you sum over I. So this is, by definition, if we would like to calculate the mean first passage time, what it depends on. Now this is impossible. Usually, if you want to calculate all the spectrum of the operator, there is no chance that you get any asymptotic formula. So now I'm going to explain to you what we did through simulations and the approximation that, to justify the approximation that I'm going to do now. When we ran simulations of the looping, we really found that, so this is now intuition from simulations. This is numerical simulation, this is stochastic simulation. We found that the first looping time as a function of time was exactly exponential with a single exponential. Now this was, and actually it was not exactly like this. There was two regimes. A very short regime where you could see one exponential, and the second one where there was another one. And this was for n not too large, but n, when n was very large, it was really dominated by a single exponential. Suggesting that we didn't need, I mean, formally you have this, but there was also a spectral gap here. And the probability distribution function, when you have a polymer of size n as a function of t, we could get the following estimate. This is exponential minus lambda 0 t plus c1 exponential minus lambda 1 t plus terms that are negligible of exponential minus lambda t for lambda bigger than lambda 1. And the contribution of these terms, this is obtained numerically when we did some simulation, was about 0.9. That is, most of the weight was carried by the first term here when we started with a uniform distribution according to the density here. And so C1 was about 0.1. So this term corresponded here to this first drop, which was faster. But most of the mean first passage time is carried by the first eigenvalue. And thus, we looked at the following approximation, that you can approximate this sum by just taking basically all the CIs after the first one are 0. And you get, so let's call it lambda 0. This is the approximation that we're going to use. And what we are left with is how to calculate the first eigenvalue of an operator, which is a second order partial differential equation in very high dimension, to a domain where we have 0 absorbing boundary condition here on a very small domain. And if we get this explicitly, we are done. Now, how do you do this?
So this lambda naught, it is going to go to 0 as epsilon goes to 0, right?
I'm sorry?
The lambda naught will go to 0 as epsilon goes to 0, right?
As epsilon goes to 0, the mean first passage time goes to infinity, so lambda 0 goes to 0. That's right.
All right, so exactly the same as in your Brownian motion case.
That's right. Exactly.
So then, I mean, but and the other eigenvalues don't go to 0, right? They go
That's right. That's right.
So isn't it just a direct analogy of your 2D Brownian?
Yeah, this is why I brought it here. It's the same idea.
Okay.
The same idea. However, there are differences. That's why I wanted to bring that. Here, you have a narrow hole. It's small. Here, it is spread. And we will see in the formula of the asymptotic formula that I'm using from Riemannian geometry. And I think you asked the question last time. If you are in very high dimension, the hole here doesn't stay like 2 dimension or 1 dimension like you have here. The dimension of the hole is growing with n. But what is important is the difference that we have between the space and the hole, because this leads to algebraic equation. So if you are, let's say, in dimension 3, how many equations do we have here? If you are in dimension 3, each UP is U1, U2, U3. So it's actually 3 equations. So 3 equations, which means the complementary in dimension where we are of 3 equations is a dimension -3. And this dimension -3 is exactly the same as solving the narrow escape problem in dimension 3, because what is important is the difference between where you are and where you have to go. Okay, so this is, it took us a while to understand all of this. It took us months or 2 to calculate and to understand why we got these results. And it came from there. So now let's go to the next stage, which is now how to calculate the spectrum. And this is not from us. This has been discovered by great asymptotics on Riemannian geometry almost 20, 30 years ago. And now I'm going to describe this. So now the next question is to calculate lambda 0 in such geometry. I lost the eraser. Do you see them? It's not. They're not in my pocket. Ah, yeah, they're in the chair. Yes. Thanks. Okay. Again, why all of this effort? Why all of this effort for deriving this asymptotic formula is because they tell us the dependency on the parameters that we will use to interpret then the data from empirical data from genetics. Okay, so now I have to give the proper quotation for the names of okay, so this is now the Chabel and Holcman results. I think it's 1989 Duke Journal of Mathematics, Duke Mathematical Journal. And this is a theorem about spectral perturbation. So what the theorem says is that if you have the Laplace operator on the Riemannian manifold, Vn is a metric. This is unimportant. What is important is the spirit. And you make a hole in the space. And the hole is our S epsilon here. Then if you make a hole, let's say you have a tubular, you have a manifold, you create a tubular neighborhood, and you call it S epsilon. For this, you have, suppose you have a compact manifold, you have a spectrum. Lambda 1, lambda n is a spectrum of the non-perturbed for the non-perturbed domain. Now what happens if you perturb the domain? Well, the idea is that you get a shifted spectrum and the relation, and this I'm not going to prove, I'm going to write directly the connection. They were able to calculate, so this is general settings, which is great because this can be adapted here to express the shift in the spectrum and to relate it to the initial spectrum. And it goes like this. Lambda I epsilon, so for the domain of epsilon, is equal to the spectrum when you don't have this domain. And this is related to your question, Peter, about the fact that the first one goes to 0, but not the other one, because the other one are close to the rest of the spectrum. It's a constant C2, epsilon, integration of the associated, so let's suppose here it's not degenerated operator, so we have only one values, eigenfunction for one associated to each space, that you have to integrate over the skeleton. The skeleton is when epsilon equals 0. So when epsilon equals 0, we define what was S0. And this is for the normalized. So this is for the matrix induced on something that has been reduced. So this is dV, the Riemannian induced metric on S0. And this is omega I is normalized. For example, normalized in L2. So we'll see in a second where it comes. This is true, this epsilon, when for codimension 3, that is the dimension of S0 plus 3 equals n, equals the dimension of the space, which is exactly what we have here. Here we have this is exactly codimension 3 because we have 3 algebraic equations. So you reduce by 3.
So basically when you have one constraint.
One constraint.
In 3D.
That's right. That's right.
And
we looked.
And if you had more than one constraint?
This is a great question. Then you can add, then you have to see what is the structure of what you get, because either they are independent or they can cross. Yeah. If they cross to something of measure 0, you're okay. So, for example, this is the case, what you're asking. We looked at this recently, about a loop with 3 beads. How long it takes to have this? This is exactly 2 constraints. Yeah. You have AB and BC. Now you have an equation for this, an equation for that, and now you can do the same. You can do the same analysis, and then you reduce. Now you have to lose this by you have 3 more additional constraints, and that will affect the results. But basically, you stay in codimension 3 because, well, except for this region that intersect, the space, which is you have the 2 conditions together, you stay in codimension 3 for the ensemble. Okay, so this is the theorem, their theorem, that we have applied here. Now, wait, I have to give you more details. C2 equals 2 pi to the power 3/2 divided by the gamma function of 3/2. Okay, what is, now, so this is the theorem, Chapel-Feldman theorem. What is, if you have a compact domain, what is the solution, the first eigenvalue of the Laplacian? First eigenvalue of the Laplacian, if you are in a compact domain, of the equation minus lambda u equals lambda u, this is u equal constant and lambda equals 0. As Peter mentioned, because the first one converges to 0, which is obviously obvious here. So the first eigenvalue of the Laplacian on a compact set, which is what we have here. I will explain why it is compact. It's due to the exponential terms that this is due to the exponential minus phi. So basically, when we are going to apply this, so now let's applying of this formula. Application, just this is what we took, and now we'll go for the application. So now, application of the formula. Application of the Chapel-Feldman formula. So, lambda 0 is equal to 0. So this is great. We don't care about this. Now we start to see the structure of the solution. There is a constant. Now we have epsilon. So now, since the mean first pass sham is 1 over this, we see that it will depend on 1 over epsilon. And obviously in this term, that we have to calculate explicitly, we should be able to find the dependency in all the other parameters. So lambda I epsilon is equal to C2 epsilon. So now the reason that the space here is compact, although it's Rn, is due to the measure exponential minus phi that we have to calculate. So here this is C2 epsilon. We integrate over S0 of exponential minus phi of x. So we take, what is the first eigenvalue? The first eigenfunction. It's a constant one. It has to be non-zero. So here we use this, and it is normalized. So this is dx. So the first eigenvalue is 1, but 1 multiplied by this measure. And then we have to normalize it, so that we have here exponential minus phi of x integrated over all the space, d of x. This is the L1 normalization, so that we get here integration of this.
Sorry, David, I didn't quite get this.
Okay.
So how did you go from here to here?
Okay, so this is now a theorem for the Laplacian. Now our operator is not the Laplacian, it is Laplacian plus
Oh, okay. All right.
Divergence of gradient phi. Let's call L of P. This is the operator. Now, if we want to apply this, we have to get rid of this. And this you can get rid of by changing measure and having an exponential phi in the dx. So then we are back to a Laplace type operator. Except that now we have to do this shift in the measure. This is exponential minus phi dx. This is why it comes from this. And being constant here, if you are a pure Laplacian, constant is a constant, but here it's constant exponential minus phi. This is the meaning of the first eigenvalue P1. And then we normalize it. That is, integral of this equals to 1, which means that if integral of this equals to 1, means constant equals 1 divided by the integral of exponential minus phi, which I've written here. Right? So this is the constant is equal to P1 is equal to this, divided by integral of exponential phi, integral of all the domain, everything. Now I took this square root. Now, yes, now you take this and you take it in here. All right, so this is 1. Wait, now this is P1. Yeah, so this is 1. Now I take this P1 and I plug it in here. So this is squared. So let's do it slowly. Now this is the integral of omega 1, or P1 squared, d volume. So d volume is exponential minus phi dx. P1 squared, so this is a constant. So if it is a constant, I put it out. And now I have just to divide by this, which is integration of exponential minus phi over the entire domain. So now what you need to calculate, so this is actually u1, un minus 1, and this is du1, dun minus 1, and this is du1, dun minus 1. Now you need to calculate just Gaussian integral.
Why do you write omega tilde? That is different?
Omega tilde should be the same. Why do you see omega tilde? Yeah, sorry. Okay, so now let's calculate the ratio. So what are we talking about here? This is the ratio. Okay, this is now the phi is the potential that was written somewhere, which is the sum. So now let's calculate this. If we can calculate this ratio, we're done. Phi is 1/2 of kappa of the sum of up squared from 1 to n minus 1. So what is this integral equal to? It's easy. it's the integral of a Gaussian integral, of a Gaussian cap divided by 2 sum of up squared du1 du n minus 1, and we have to integrate over r cube multiply how many times? N minus 1, because we have n minus bid. Now this is classical, you just calculate this immediately. This is Gaussian. So the result is 2 pi to the power n minus 1 divided by the product. Yeah, sorry. Here it's not kappa. This is here. There is a kappa p. This is kappa p. We had, this is, the kappa p was defined before. And then you have here the product of kappa p. And that's it, to the power from 1 to n minus 1 to the power 3/2. Okay, so this is the integral on the denominator. Now what is this? This is the integral of the potential over the closing loop, the loop that are closed. Okay, so this is what we need to calculate, integrating Gaussian integral. We have to integrate this Gaussian integral over the space of loops. S0 equals 0 means we have this condition. Okay, so now, and kappa p, I will write it in here. The kappa p that we had in here, this is kappa p, was equal to 4 kappa sine squared pi p divided by n. Okay, so now how do we do this? So let's go slowly. Basically, we have to integrate with a constraint. So this is like having, we have to use, what is this constraint here? Let's write it in an intuitive manner. Basically, so integration of exponential minus 1/2 of kappa p. But let's write each term so we can see what happened. It's kappa 1, u1 squared, right? Wait, yeah, this is correct. Plus kappa 2, u2 squared, plus kappa, we go to n minus 1, un minus 1 squared. du1, du, and let me write it this way. Here, of course, we have to reduce. There is one variable that will be combination of the other, because what happened, if we use this sum, we're going to get u1 w, yeah, u1, let's call it cosine pi divided by 2n plus u3 cosine pi divided by 3 divided by 2n plus, suppose n is such that n minus 1 is odd, then we get here un minus 1 cosine what is necessary here, pi probably n minus 1 divided n minus 1 divided by 2n, and this has to be equal to 0, right? Which means that un minus 1, so this is the important part here, un minus 1 can be written as a function of the others. Un minus 1 is now a combination of u1, u3, so you take this, put it here, and now we just put it square. Right? So this is the important part. This is how we are going to calculate this Gaussian integral with the condition that we're integrating over loops. Un minus 1. You see, basically the Chauvel allowed us to reduce from something of epsilon to something squeezed. It's 0 now. And it tells the structure. The structure is epsilon. Epsilon is basically what happened transversally. And now we have to integrate over the fiber, over this manifold. And now, so this is just a classical integral. Now we explain un minus 1 as a function of this. So this is un minus 1 cosine this. So you divide everything by cosine. You write un minus 1 as a function of u1. And now you plug into here.
I get it.
Right, this is a linear equation.
Yeah. You just get a quadratic form.
That's right.
And then you just covariance matrix.
This is exactly a simple matrix problem afterwards. Now we are going to calculate. We'll put that in here. Now we have to redistribute all the terms. This is elementary matrix question. So this is the heart of the calculation. Right? So this is equal to 0. We get un minus 1. So let me do 1 or 2 more elementary steps. I like this because this is elementary calculations that reveals how it works. Un minus 1 is equal to, so let's put everything here in this. So this is minus u1 cosine pi divided by 2n. Now we have to divide by this. So this is divided by cosine of pi n minus 1 divided by 2n. And then we can continue. This is minus u3, and we do the same. Cosine of this divided by the same quantity. Cosine of pi n minus 1 divided by 2n, and so on. Minus, and then you take this, and now you replace it in here. All right, what's going to happen? What about?
You get U transpose mu.
Yeah, all right, now, okay, let's go. There are two things. First of all, what happened? So this is the, what happened to the even number? Are they going to be affected? 2, 4, 6. None of them are going to be affected. Only the odd numbers are going to get the contribution, because now what we have to do is to calculate this squared, put it squared, and that's it. And now we have to sum it, redistribute, and this is some algebraic manipulation, elementary. And as Kevin said, we're going to get, so let's call this the I integral. Now we are calculating this. Let me erase this part. Now we are left. So there are a couple of things here. This is what happened in the integral, and now you have to be careful for the matrix induced. You have to use, you have to see the matrix which is induced. So this is an hyperplane, the normal vector of this. So what's going to be important is the normal vector ni, which is of component omega 1, 0, omega. Yeah, let's call what is omega. I call this is called omega 1. This is called omega 3, and so on. So this is the representation of un minus 1 as a function of this. So we have u3 and so on, u n minus 1. So in this, the normal vector is the n1 and tensor n2, tensorial nd, and then the volume dx or dvg is the norm of this and du. And so now that I is what Kevin said, you have, so the norm of, there is a norm here of the vector, which is coming from differential geometry. We have to integrate over S0, exponential minus 1/2. So we have, let's call it U, B, U transpose. Or this is a symmetric matrix, du. And now, what is the matrix B? So the matrix B is elementary. For the term, the even term are not affected. So this is kappa P for P even. And for P odd, this is kappa P, delta Pk, plus Kn minus 1, omega P, omega Q. And that's it. Now this is, and now we have to, now we can integrate over U1, U2. So this is du1, du2, du n minus 2, because du n minus 1 now is replaced. So we have reduced the dimension to the integration over this skeleton. Right? And U here, U is U1, U n minus 2. Now this is the classical integral in the reduced dimension. And for this, it's you have to, it's a matrix basically. This is, so P even you can calculate because you can separate the even dimension to the odd dimension, and then we are back to a Gaussian integral for the even number. But for the odd numbers, it's basically kappa P delta Dirac. So this is basically almost a diagonal matrix perturbed by a matrix of ranked exactly 1. So you can diagonalize this matrix. So there is here some linear algebra. And basically this is equal to the one. So this is the classical, I'm using non-classical result. This is 1 over the determinant of the matrix B, square root. And then we have 2 pi to some power. Now the same as before that we had for the other term, except that we are in dimension n minus 2 divided by 2. Okay, and now this can be calculated. So I equals so this is 1 over the determinant of A. So this is 2 pi n minus 2 to the power 3 divided by 2. There is this term which is a normal, which is the sum of omega p squared to the power d minus d is 3 divided by 2. And this is for p odd. And then we have to divide by the square root of the determinant of B. And this is the result. This is the product of kappa P for P odd. The sum of omega P squared divided by kappa P, P odd. This is a monster. And yeah, to the power, to the power, yeah, 1/2. Yeah, no, sorry, 3/2, because we have to do it for each dimension. Dimension, we have 3, so that's why there is a factor 3 here and 3 here. Okay, so after all of these exercises is done, we end up with a formula for the eigenvalues, which is lambda epsilon. So now we have to wait. Well, let me write down the ratio, the final ratio. Yeah, it's not written. Okay, so I think I did it yesterday. So this is, there is a sum. So this is the, yeah, just one sec. I have to read my notes. Yeah, okay. So this is the product. This product should cancel now. Okay, so this is the integration of exponential minus phi over S0 divided by omega tilde. Omega tilde, we just said that this is 2 pi n minus 1 multiplied by the product of kappa p to the power 3/2. And S is the integral of, there's a 2 pi n minus 2 product of p odd of omega p squared divided by the product of kappa p, and then we have the sum of omega p squared divided by kappa p for p odd, and this is everything to the same power 3/2. So there are cancellations. This is 2 pi, 2 pi, the product of kappa p and kappa p. And here there is one part that is missing, which is this sum here that we should see in the numerator. So this is coming from this part. So there is a sum here, sum of omega p squared, p odd. All right, so now kappa p, we know this is something that is a sum of elementary function, and omega p, I wrote it to you as was so omega p was cosine p pi divided by 2n divided by sine, is it true? By sine pi divided by 2n. So in the end, what we have to calculate.
I thought it was a cos.
It was a cos, no? Yeah. Cosine. Okay, so this is a constant. Now we have to calculate sums that are sums of cosine omega p squared, or this is omega p squared divided by kappa p. So now it's not very hard. We have to sum for p odd of omega p, for example, squared. So this is just the sum, but this is, you agree, this is independent of n, so I just have to calculate this one. Cosine squared of p pi divided by 2n for p odd. And this turns out you can calculate by different methods. You can linearize and just sum of exponential. It's not very hard. So this is equal to m plus 1 divided by 2 plus something like sine 2m plus 2 pi divided by n divided by 4 sine pi divided by n, where m equals n minus 2 divided by 2, when n is even, or n minus 3 divided by 2 when n is odd. So what I'm saying is that this is not explicit calculations. We have reduced everything to a product of sums of things that has to do with basically cosine or tangent. So for example, now let's calculate omega p squared divided by kappa p. Kappa p is something now with a sine squared. So omega p, so again, the cosine here will drop because we have the sum here and here. So the kappa p here, this term, sorry, the cosine will drop. And we have omega p. Where is omega? Yeah, omega p squared divided by kappa p, which is basically cosine p divided by 2n divided by sine. So cosine divided by sine, this is cotangent, right? So this is cotangent of pi p divided by 2n. And we have to sum for p odd. Sum for p odd. And of course, there is here an additional, there is a constant here. I'm not going to write it down. The constant is 4 kappa, and then there is this cosine, which is fixed. And then you end up having that this is equal to n squared. I think we use for this, and this should be squared, cotangent squared. We used Euler-Maclaurin formula, and this is like n squared divided by 2 plus something negligible. And so now what we did is you replace all of these sums in here. So we have the sum here. The product, this kappa p, this product here cancels with this kappa p here. There is a product here that we can calculate explicitly. And basically when we do the ratio and do all the cancellation, you get that lambda 0 is equal to kappa n pi to the power 3/2, which is coming from this term. And there is a 4 pi epsilon, which is coming from the separation here. And of course, you have to use the constant. Wait, n, that's right. And so the mean first passage time, so this is, I'm not giving you all the detail, but this is true for epsilon. It has to be small, n has to be large enough. And then this is how we found that the mean first passage time, which is 1 over this, was proportional to n to the power 3/2 divided by epsilon, and there is then the constant that we have to adjust. There's a constant here that you can get. So this gives us the leading order term, which is n to the power 3/2. Okay, so this is the leading order term, but this was not enough to capture what we wanted. There is actually a contribution of the next term, which I'm not going to do now. It's to explain the first. We can expand here. So this is there's an epsilon. We can expand okay, so this is the term of epsilon. Here, there is actually, you can continue the expansion. There is a term in epsilon squared that will arrive. When you count for this term here, I don't have the, fortunately, I don't have here the exact expression for this. But if you continue the expansion, you can get the second order term here. And the second order term turned out to be plus. So I'm not doing, there is one pushing, it will take me another half hour to do this. So this we found here the leading order term. If you continue the expansion, you get here a term which is n squared with a constant, which is independent of epsilon, because epsilon cancels out when you do 1 over, because you have to do 1 over this lambda epsilon. So when epsilon is small, this is a leading order term, n to the power 3/2. Now the second term is a power that is bigger than 3/2. This is bigger than 3/2, which shows that it will blow up. So when this term is dominating, there is a contribution of the n squared, and this is what people discovered about 30 years ago when they did some simulation of a polymer collapsing. They found out that it was independent of epsilon when the polymer was very big. 20 years ago, there was some publication showing that this is what they found, although there was no proof. It was thought to be like this by numerical simulation. This is the mathematical steps toward it. It was really determined, going through Riemannian geometry, the asymptotics, this Gaussian integral, to get this factor. So now we have this expansion, which again, it should be understood for n fixed and epsilon small, but what turned out to be very interesting in the simulation, this was true for very large n. This formula is very good over a very long interval of n. It cannot be, again, a uniform expansion, because then we go here, if we could continue the extension, which we don't, I don't know how it goes. Probably if we have more n, this will blow up, or maybe here we have nothing, but again, we cannot have at the same time a uniform expansion in n and epsilon.
You first have to do a large n expansion for fixed epsilon, and if you could work that out, then you could possibly do a double limit, right?
If somebody can do that. We can do for n fixed and epsilon goes to 0, but the other limit we don't know. Okay, so I'll finish with this. I wanted to present something else, but I want to now to go back to the application of all of this.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to understand the precise argument you made to say that you could apply this Chauvel-Feldman result to your operator, which was actually Laplacian plus the gradient phi part. You said change the measure.
Yes.
So we can talk about this offline if you want, but I'm not following that.
Okay, no. Look, there is a step here.
Yeah.
If you want to, I'll explain in a second, and then we can go slowly about it. So when you have an operator which is self-adjoint operator, for example, minus Laplacian, u equals plus Laplacian u, let's say, plus divergence of gradient phi u equals, let's say, lambda u, or minus lambda u. You can always change the measure, write it exponential phi.
To make it self-adjoint.
To make it self-adjoint, that's right. So the lambda, the eigenvalues is going to be, the eigenvalue problem is lambda equal exponential this.
But I understand that you can change the measure to make the operator self-adjoint.
It is self-adjoint to begin with. So I'm using the fact that it is self-adjoint.
In what space?
In L2 you have, if you have gradient u, if gradient phi, if the vector field is a gradient of a function.
Yeah.
gradient phi, let's say gradient u. Now let's consider u exponential phi gradient u. And let's take the divergence of this.
Yeah, I understand itself is joined in a weighted space.
Yeah, so that's it. I'm using now the fact that you can get the lambda explicitly with the exponential phi. So if we calculate this, this is divergence. So this is exponential phi. This is exponential phi Laplacian u plus gradient phi gradient u. So if this is equal to lambda u, now this is exactly exponential phi lambda u. Multiply everything by u, integrate, multiply by u, you integrate by parts, and you get exponential phi equals gradient u squared equals lambda exponential phi u squared. So your measure now becomes exponential phi. And your lambda is like the one of the Laplacian. You minimize, the functional you have to minimize is gradient u squared. You divide by this, and the measure is the exponential phi.
But I guess, and you're seeing the spectral perturbation theory of Cheval and Feldman, that Vn is allowed to be a
That's right.
measure?
That is, the measure is a Riemannian measure. So I take the measure, exponential, oh, this is with minus, I'm sorry. Okay, the same. But I take the measure, dv equal this dx. This is the measure I'm taking.
Okay.
There is a, I mean, yeah, there is a, if you want to be careful, it's, you have to see that now you can apply this to this with this measure. But since it was true for any j, any metric, the metric can be written here. You take the metric. The metric is divergent determinant of the
You just do nice
of the metric of the Riemannian metric dx. So you take this equal to exponential phi.
That's underdetermined, so do you...
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do it carefully. I mean, we found that it was the same structure.
Is this published?
The PRL is published. The full one is going to be sent 3 years after the PRL. We have, we have all the analysis and the boundary layer analysis in very high dimension. And here we have explained, we just said that we can just, we take this way, we take this. You can always do a conformal mapping. I mean, if you do conformal mapping, you write j equals a function multiplied by identity, and this function of the conformal mapping is related to phi, and that's it.
This argument is in your PRL paper?
No.
Okay, it's in the paper that you are sending in.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Okay.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, if you have two loops,
It's two loops, yes.
then okay. So I mean, this single, when you were calculating this this multidimensional integral, this single constraint essentially imposed two structures, the odd and the even nodes on the matrix. So if you have two loops or three loops or four loops, presumably you could do the same thing, but it would impose a sort of different sort of structures on the matrix, and you can still do this analysis. And
I mean, we tried it.
It would be horrible. But.
That's right. It's horrible. We could not finish because now you don't have any more beautiful matrix which is perturbed. You see, basically,
this B matrix still would have a structure. I mean, you can read. I mean, if you took your B matrix and you reordered it in terms of your odd nodes and your even nodes, you have a very nice structure to it. Right?
That's right.
So if you now have two constraints, and you would then end up with a sort of a three substructure problem in which you just reorder.
That's right.
And then you have a nice
That's
formulation,
right.
and then I think you can do that.
No, I agree with you. I'm sure we can do it. We started. We look at it was looking messy, but I agree with you. We did some simulations. We should find out the exact solution and see how it differs from. Obviously, if you're interested in three loops, if this guy is very close to this one, you have as if it was a single one.
Yeah, sure.
So the maximum time for this event is when this is big, exactly in the middle. So we want now to calculate, instead of having a term that depends only on the length here, it will depend on the position of the intermediate guy, M,
Yeah.
let's say.
Yeah.
So in principle, this is the idea, to have a full expansion. Okay, so this we did. Let me give the reference. Let's spend 5 more minutes and then we will stop. So
having done this, remind me, then what did you do with it?
yeah, let's discuss.
I've
Yeah,
followed
sure,
the maths,
sure.
but I've got to forgotten why you did it.
Right, so first, this gives us the law of looping as a function of the different coefficients. What I wanted to say, I'm not sure I have my full brain. Yes, okay. So the conclusion for this, so this is PRL 2012, and this is Amitai and myself. But the conclusion is basically that mean first looping time, tau, equals n to the power pi divided by kappa, 3/2. The square root, I'm not giving you the entire result, pi 4 pi epsilon, plus a constant, there's a b squared, okay, I haven't defined everything, b squared. B squared is a mean squared displacement between two neighboring beads. Okay, but in principle, this is for an infinite domain, and we don't see the effect of the domain here. It's infinite, and it's when n goes to infinity, basically the loop, the time should take ages to come back, as we see it. It's n to the power 3/2 plus this n squared. Then the second effort was how this is changed when we do looping in a confined domain. Now, if you do looping in a confined domain, the loop cannot escape to infinity. So when n goes to infinity, the time as a function of n should not go to infinity. It should go basically to some asymptotics. This is a very hard problem, and we didn't solve that explicitly. I want to spend 5 minutes to explain what did we solve and why this is very hard. So now this is looping in confined domain, and the looping in confined domain, this would just be some remarks and results without proof. Now, again, as Peter said, this is a very involved proof that use technique from different domain of mathematics, from elementary matrices, some complex geometry, and this gives results really in polymer physics, which is really going that way to get these asymptotic formulas. But at least now this is without any approximation of looking at the time it takes for looping by ignoring all of the other polymer. You have to account. There is no, I mean, for us, there was no other way to calculate this. You have to go in this high dimensional space. So looping in a confined domain, what do we expect? The time should converge as n goes to infinity to a limit. Now the question is, how do we solve this question? How do we calculate now? How do we apply all of this? You see, here there was a constraint of looping. But how do you put in here the constraint of having a boundary? That is, let's imagine the simplest of all of the boundary, you are in a ball. Now this gives a hard constraint because we need to have the sum of, let's say if the polymer is in the real space, the sum of this is less than the radius of the sphere. This is the constraint. Now how do we use this in this constraint? We could not. We didn't know. So what we did instead, we said, all right, this condition was too hard to take into account into this notion of loop, because you see, you have to say that you're in the loop, but all are constrained. So here is the trick. The trick is to say that the potential phi of the beads is the Rouse potential, that is Rn minus 1 or n plus 1 squared, kappa divided by 2. And then we said, let's imagine that the entire polymer is confined by a quadratic potential. This was the idea that saved us. So let's call it beta, or beta divided by 2, the sum of Rn squared. That is, what is the message? Ignore the boundary. Now instead of having the phi, which is the phi we have used all along here, which is the sum of the energy of, this is the Rouse polymer that we have used, phi for Rouse. Just use this. Then we can redo all the calculation, because basically, again, we are going to get Gaussian integrals. And now we said, all right, let's give some calibration. Say that, how do you choose this beta? So we said choose beta such that when you do calculation for Rn minus Rn, so you take all the realization of your polymer, you take its square. This can be calculated with this. And let's say that this is equal to the radius of your sphere or your ball, a squared. And this gave us a relation between beta, that is the value of the weight you have to put here on the potential wells. You have a potential well that restricts the motion, because it's like putting a spring constant beta for all of them to be confined. And the mean confinement is you calibrate through this radius. And this will give us a strange relation, which is given by A is this A4 divided B squared, this is mean square displacement between two beads, 2A squared. We found out a formula for this.
This actually makes more sense in some ways than the original problem, because your domain isn't just some rigid boundary where you don't feel it and you bounce off it and it confines you. This is like a softer boundary, which is almost perhaps more realistic. Right?
You mean for the biology?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can justify it the way, with intuition that you are giving. The idea is that for us to do that, our state of mind, that we could not do it with the
Rigid constraint.
yeah, it was too hard to see how it was nonlinear, and it's impossible. So then now comes to the connection to data, and this is an important point, because this is the connection to the introduction. Again, this data is going to be more and more accessible. It's about this IC data, about the encounter probability of two pieces of genome as a function of the genomic distance, and people are very much interested in reconstructing the nucleus organization, very much. Now, how to do it, nobody knows. So at least we wanted to give some piece of information, and it goes like this. Now, if the encounter time, if you have a polymer, this is a nucleus, for example, and you look at the encounter probability of, let's say, of these two guys in a ball of radius A. Now we can calculate the encounter probability. I did for the extreme end, 1 and n, but you can do it basically for any two, and what is outside doesn't count. And the probability that, let's say, n meet m, condition that everything is of total length n, this is just the rate of lambda nm that's to meet, and you normalize it so that you have a probability of a lambda n m tilde for m tilde, which sum over all the points here of the monomer, of the polymer. What is lambda? Lambda is exactly 1 over the time, tau. What is tau? Tau is something that you can calculate. So I can give the formula. The formula is ugly. I'll give it in a second. What you get from here, as a function of the genomic distance between n and m, you get the encounter probability, which is the sum of the rate of encounter, which is 1 over the mean first passage time. So then, what we did is we had the data of the encounter probability as a function of the genomic distance, and what we observed that it was converging here to, not to 0, it was converging to an asymptotic value, which is basically the idea that if you now are doing a looping in a confined domain, n doesn't go to infinity, which means 1 over lambda doesn't go to 0, but it goes to a constant value, and this constant value was depending on A. Now, this is an interesting idea. Let's do a reverse engineering problem. If I can fit a curve like this on this data,
What is the x-axis?
the genomic distance, n. So for example, this is n minus m here. So let's fix n equals 1 and m is moving. Now if it goes to a constant here, we could relate this constant to A. And now you can go to the data, fit, I'll write to finish the asymptotic formula that we have for looping in a confined domain, and we could extract A, suggesting, and what we found is that there was some subdomains where the genome that we got, the genomic information, subdomains where it was confined. And this was given because the idea is that this is not 0, this is converging, because again, 1 over tau doesn't go to infinity, which means it goes to a constant, which is 1 over this goes to a constant. And this constant was depending on A. Now we could extract A, and we could find that there is subdomains. So this is how we can solve this. All of these asymptotics allow us to say that if you can take this data, we can get some kind of mean. Of course, it's not going to be a perfect sphere, but the idea is that there is subdomains in the nucleus where the genomic, the chromatin is confined, and this can be extracted by looking at the asymptotic behavior or this encounter probability. All right, so this is an important message, that asymptotics can be used to analyze this chromatin information IC data and to extract precise information about sub-behavior inside the nucleus, which is coming from statistics. Right? So this is an important step into this analysis.
So can you validate this program that you just outlined on a simulated model, or you sort of by design?
This is exactly what we did. So we did first the simulations. We did first the direct engineering problem. You fix A, and you look at this probability of the mean first pass is dependent on A. And then we did it for different A. And then once we understood that there was this relation that could be extracted, we said, now let's go to the data. Let's fit a curve to the point. So there was point here, experimental point. We used the analytic formula. You got the A, and now you had to basically solve a nonlinear equation to find A. So let me now finish. I'll give you, as I promise, if I can find my notes, these changes, how this formula is changed in a domain, confined domain. So this is, I think, an application, a real application that leads to extraction of new pieces of information from data. And this is basically where we are now. We are just applying the theory of Polymer to extract more precise information about chromatin organization and connect to real data to understand how from this matrix, we can reconstruct precisely the polymer and how the polymer interact to look at the genomic interactions and the regulation of the gene. So this is the final formula for a confined domain. Tau is square root of 2. We get 4 pi epsilon d. And then comes the difference, 4 pi n. And then we had this n squared, beta plus pi squared kappa. And then there was 4 square root of kappa beta. Beta is the spring constant to restrict. You can see that when n goes to infinity, now you have the balance with n squared, which comes here from with the beta, which prevent this to increase to infinity. And then there was, so this is this multiplied by pi divided by 2 minus tangent, arctangent of 2 square root kappa divided by beta, tangent of pi divided by 2n. Yeah, again, this is a bit ugly. To the power 3/2. So beta, I just erased it, but beta was connected to A. So take this formula, take 1 over, for example, this, the rate lambda. We have the explicit expression in function of beta. Now you can fit with beta, and beta then you just, you see how you get the positive root of this equation, and you get A, which gives you a radius of confinement. All right, so I think I'll stop here this class. This was really going into details of some application calculation. There is a lot to be done here. Probably in the nucleus, the chromatin has all kind of binding, and it's not just a free Rouse polymer that can be used, but really we have to squeeze or to bind some part. Binding this chromatin at some specific point can be computed from the encounter probability matrix. And I think a lot can be done now about this prediction about finally how some genes can be regulated depending on where they are, the locations, how they can interact. I mean, a lot is going to happen in the next years on this. Okay? Thank you guys for coming for all of these classes, especially Ben, who came almost from the beginning. So let's stop here. I wanted to discuss about something else, but I have no energy anymore. This was the idea of if you go to single particle trajectory and you have a polymer which is interacting here, and you are looking at a polymer a certain distance away, can you recover the force? And this we can, and it is of the same spirit. You have to calculate basically matrices. It's a succession of elementary algebraic matrices, but in that context. So I'll finish with this. So this is in PRL 2013. And the other that I wanted to speak, I will not speak about it. So this is Amitai and myself. And then the other one I wanted to discuss is published in PLOS Computational Biology. And this is in 2015. So this is 2013, 2015. And this is myself and other colleagues in biology who provided us with the experimental data. So we had data of a spot on the chromosome on yeast, and we could extract from this spot the force that was exerted in this on the chromatin somewhere. All right? Okay, so let's stop here.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Very good, Dave.
Yeah, all right. So I hope it will bring some ideas if you guys want to go into the business of IC data, which is very very big at the moment. There's a lot of effort to really understand how the nucleus is organized. This is really big data. How you reconstruct really a nucleus from all of this information. There is no today a consensus about the method. All right.